Detective Sergeant James Mitchell had seen many things during his 15 years protecting the British royal family, but nothing had prepared him for what he discovered on that foggy October morning in 2023. The 42-year-old veteran of the Metropolitan Police's Royalty Protection Unit was conducting routine security checks when he stumbled upon something that would change everything he thought he knew about the monarchy. It started with a simple administrative task. Mitchell was reviewing financial security protocols for Queen Camilla's charitable activities when he noticed an unusual pattern in the documentation. Among the hundreds of donations and transactions that crossed his desk monthly, one particular entry caught his attention. A modest donation of $5,000 had been made to a small children's charity in rural Scotland, but something about the paperwork seemed off. The donation appeared legitimate on the surface. It bore all the proper signatures and authorization codes that Mitchell had become familiar with during his years of service. Queen Camilla had long been known for her charitable work, particularly with organizations supporting children and literacy programs. This donation to the Highland Children's Trust seemed perfectly in line with her public commitments. However, Mitchell's trained eye noticed several inconsistencies. The routing number on the bank transfer didn't match the standard codes used for royal charitable giving. The charity's registration details, when he cross-referenced them with official records, showed discrepancies in the founding dates and board member listings. Most troubling of all, the approval process had bypassed several security checkpoints that were mandatory for all royal financial transactions. Mitchell knew he was treading on dangerous ground. His role was to protect, not to investigate the very people he served. Yet his instincts, honed by years of police work before joining the Royal Protection Unit, told him something was seriously wrong. The detective in him couldn't let this slide, even if it meant potentially jeopardizing his career and reputation. He began his investigation quietly, using his off-duty hours to dig deeper into the Highland Children's Trust. What he found was disturbing. The charity had been established just 3 months before receiving Queen Camilla's donation, and its registered address led to an empty office building in Glasgow. The listed board members either didn't exist or had no knowledge of their supposed involvement with the organization. As Mitchell dug deeper, he discovered that the Highland Children's Trust was far from an isolated case. Over the past 2 years, similar donations had been made to dozens of small charities across the United Kingdom, all following the same pattern. Each organization had been recently established, operated from questionable addresses, and received exactly $5,000 from sources connected to various members of the royal household. The scope of what he was uncovering began to dawn on Mitchell. This wasn't simply a case of administrative error or minor financial irregularity. The pattern suggested something much more systematic and troubling. Someone was using the royal family's charitable giving as a front for something else entirely, and Queen Camilla's name was being used as a key component in whatever scheme was unfolding. Mitchell realized he needed help, but he also knew that approaching this through normal channels could be catastrophic. If his suspicions were correct, the network he was uncovering could involve people at the highest levels of the royal household. Going through official channels might alert the very people he was investigating, potentially destroying evidence and putting his own safety at risk. Instead, he reached out to Sarah Chen, a forensic accountant who had worked with the Metropolitan Police on several high-profile fraud cases. Chen had a reputation for discretion and thoroughness, qualities that Mitchell desperately needed. When they met at a small cafe in South London, far from the royal residences and government buildings where Mitchell usually worked, he laid out his findings. Chen listened intently as Mitchell explained the pattern of donations, the false charities, and the security breaches in the authorization process. Her expertise in financial crimes immediately recognized the hallmarks of a money laundering operation. The small amounts, the quick establishment and dissolution of organizations, and the use of respected names and institutions all pointed to a sophisticated scheme designed to move money while avoiding detection. Together, they began mapping out the network. Using Chen's analytical software and Mitchell's access to security databases, they started connecting the dots between the various fake charities and the people behind them. What emerged was a web of shell companies, false identities, and financial transfers that stretched far beyond the United Kingdom. The investigation revealed that the Highland Children's Trust was connected to similar organizations in Ireland, France, and Belgium. The same bank routing codes appeared in transactions across multiple countries, and the same small group of individuals seemed to be behind the creation of dozens of fraudulent charities. Most concerning of all, the money wasn't staying in these fake organizations. It was being transferred again within weeks of arrival, moving through an increasingly complex network of accounts before disappearing entirely. As Mitchell and Chen worked through the night in her cramped office, surrounded by printouts and computer screens displaying financial data, they realized they had uncovered something far more significant than a simple charity fraud. The network they were mapping appeared to be facilitating the movement of millions of pounds through the international financial system, using the credibility and cover of royal charitable giving to avoid scrutiny. The implications were staggering. If their analysis was correct, someone had infiltrated the royal household's charitable operations and was using the institution's reputation to launder money on an international scale. The question that haunted Mitchell as dawn broke over London was whether this was being done with the knowledge and complicity of people within the royal family itself, or whether the monarchy was simply being used as an unwitting front for criminal activity. Mitchell knew that his next steps would determine not only his own future, but potentially the reputation of the British royal family itself. The evidence he and Chen had gathered was compelling, but it was also dangerous. They were dealing with people who had the resources and connections to operate on an international scale, using one of the most respected institutions in the world as their cover. As he prepared to delve deeper into the investigation, Mitchell couldn't shake the feeling that he was opening a door that might be impossible to close. The network behind Queen Camilla's donation was vast, sophisticated, and had been operating undetected for years. Whatever he discovered next would either vindicate his suspicions or destroy everything he had worked for in his career protecting the crown. 3 weeks after his initial discovery, Detective Sergeant James Mitchell found himself in the most precarious position of his career. Working alongside forensic accountant Sarah Chen, he had uncovered a network that stretched far beyond anything they had initially imagined. The fake charity that had triggered his investigation was merely one tentacle of an operation that had been systematically exploiting royal charitable giving for nearly 3 years. Chen's analysis had revealed a disturbing pattern. The money flowing through the fake charities wasn't random or haphazard. It followed specific routes and timing that suggested careful coordination with legitimate royal events and announcements. When Queen Camilla made public appearances supporting children's causes, donations would flow to fake children's charities. When she advocated for literacy programs, money would move through fraudulent educational organizations. The sophistication of the operation became clear when Mitchell discovered that the perpetrators had been monitoring royal schedules and public statements to time their activities. They weren't just stealing money. They were using the genuine charitable work and public statements of the royal family to provide perfect cover for their financial crimes. Every legitimate act of philanthropy was being shadowed by a corresponding illegal transaction. Mitchell's investigation had led him to a shocking realization. Someone with access to confidential royal scheduling information was feeding details to the criminal network. The timing of the fraudulent donations was too precise to be coincidental. Whoever was behind this had inside knowledge of Queen Camilla's charitable activities, often knowing about events and announcements weeks before they became public. This revelation forced Mitchell to confront a terrible possibility. The leak could be coming from within the royal household itself. Someone with trusted access to Queen Camilla's schedule and charitable activities was either directly involved in the scheme or was unknowingly providing information that enabled it to function. Chen had traced the money through multiple layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. The funds were eventually being consolidated in banks in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands before disappearing entirely. The total amount being laundered through the fake charity network was approaching $50 million over the 3-year period they had been operating. But the money trail revealed something even more disturbing. The pattern of deposits and withdrawals suggested that the royal charity fraud was funding other criminal activities. Large withdrawals from the consolidated accounts corresponded with dates when major drug shipments had been intercepted by law enforcement across Europe. The network wasn't just laundering money, it appeared to be financing international drug trafficking operations. Mitchell knew he was in over his head. What had started as a routine security check had led him into the heart of an international criminal conspiracy that was using the British royal family as a front for drug trafficking and money laundering. The evidence he and Chen had gathered would be enough to destroy reputations and potentially bring down the monarchy if it became public in the wrong way. The pressure was mounting from another direction as well. Mitchell had been careful to conduct his investigation discreetly, but his unusual computer searches and requests for financial records hadn't gone entirely unnoticed. His supervisor, Inspector David Thornton, had begun asking questions about Mitchell's recent activities. Thornton was a loyal servant of the Crown who had spent his entire career protecting the royal family, and Mitchell wasn't sure whether he could be trusted with the truth about what had been discovered. The situation became even more complicated when Mitchell received an unexpected phone call. The caller identified himself as Marcus Webb, claiming to be a journalist with The Guardian who had been investigating irregularities in royal charitable giving. Webb wanted to meet, suggesting he had information that might be relevant to Mitchell's work. Against his better judgment, Mitchell agreed to the meeting. They met at a pub in East London, far from anywhere Mitchell might be recognized. Webb was a thin, nervous man in his 30s who seemed genuinely concerned about what he had discovered. He explained that he had been working on a story about charity fraud in general when he noticed several suspicious organizations that had received donations connected to royal patronage. Webb's investigation had uncovered some of the same fake charities that Mitchell and Chen had identified, but from a different angle. He had been tracking the organizations through their regulatory filings, and had noticed that many of them had been established using false documentation. More importantly, Webb had identified a pattern in the timing of their establishment that corresponded with changes in royal charitable priorities. What Webb told Mitchell next changed everything. The journalist had been contacted by someone claiming to have inside information about the royal charity fraud. The anonymous source had provided Webb with copies of internal documents that showed the approval process for royal charitable donations had been compromised. Someone with administrative access was creating false authorization codes and bypassing security checks to approve donations to fraudulent organizations. The documents Webb showed Mitchell were devastating. They included email chains discussing specific fake charities, spreadsheets tracking the flow of money through various accounts, and most damning of all, a list of upcoming royal events with notes about corresponding fraudulent donations that should be timed to coincide with them. Mitchell realized that Webb's anonymous source might be the same person who was enabling the fraud from within the royal household. The journalist was being fed information, but he didn't understand that his source wasn't a whistleblower trying to expose the crime. They were likely one of the criminals trying to control how the story came to light. The situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. If the criminals knew that their operation had been discovered, they might be using Webb to gauge how much the authorities knew. Mitchell had to consider the possibility that his own investigation had been detected and that he was now being watched. Chen's latest analysis had revealed another troubling development. The money laundering network had recently begun moving larger amounts more frequently, suggesting they might be preparing to shut down the operation and disappear with the proceeds. If that happened, not only would the criminals escape justice, but the scandal would likely destroy the reputation of Queen Camilla and potentially the entire monarchy. Mitchell faced an impossible choice. He could take his evidence to his superiors and hope that the investigation would be handled properly, but that might trigger a cover-up to protect the royal family's reputation. Alternatively, he could continue investigating on his own, but that would mean operating outside official channels and potentially breaking the law himself. The weight of responsibility was crushing. Mitchell had dedicated his career to protecting the royal family, and now he found himself in possession of information that could destroy the very institution he had sworn to serve. The criminals had chosen their target well. The monarchy's reputation for integrity and charitable work made it the perfect cover for their activities. But that same reputation made it almost impossible to expose the crime without causing irreparable damage. As Mitchell walked through London's darkened streets after his meeting with Webb, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. The investigation that had started with a simple administrative discrepancy had led him into a world of international crime, institutional corruption, and personal danger. Whatever decision he made next would determine not only his own fate, but the future of the British monarchy itself. The network behind Queen Camilla's donation was more than just a financial crime. It was a carefully orchestrated attack on one of Britain's most cherished institutions, designed to exploit the very qualities that made the royal family respected and trusted. Mitchell knew that exposing it would require courage, careful planning, and perhaps most importantly, allies he could trust, in a world where trust had become a luxury he could no longer afford. The final phase of Detective Sergeant James Mitchell's investigation began with a breakthrough that came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, Queen Camilla's private secretary for charitable affairs, had noticed the same irregularities that Mitchell had discovered, but from inside the royal household. Her growing suspicions about unauthorized charitable donations had led her to conduct her own quiet investigation. Dr. Hartwell was a career civil servant who had worked with the royal family for over 20 years. Her meticulous attention to detail and deep knowledge of royal charitable protocols made her uniquely qualified to spot the anomalies in the donation approval process. When she approached Mitchell through official channels, requesting a security review of charitable giving procedures, he realized he had found a crucial ally within the royal household. Their first meeting took place in Dr. Hartwell's office at Clarence House, surrounded by the very documents that detailed Queen Camilla's legitimate charitable work. Hartwell explained that she had become suspicious when several charitable organizations had contacted her office to thank the Queen for donations that weren't in the official records. When she investigated further, she discovered that dozens of donations had been processed using her authorization codes without her knowledge. The revelation was devastating. Someone had been systematically stealing Dr. Hartwell's digital credentials to authorize fraudulent donations. The thief had access not only to her passwords and authorization codes, but also to her computer systems and email accounts. This meant the criminal had to be someone with physical access to the royal household and detailed knowledge of the internal security systems. Working together, Mitchell and Dr. Hartwell began a careful review of everyone who had access to the Charitable Affairs Office. The list was shorter than Mitchell had expected, but it included some of the most trusted members of Queen Camilla's staff. Each person had undergone extensive background checks before being granted access to sensitive royal financial information. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Dr. Hartwell's computer systems were subjected to a forensic analysis by Sarah Chen. The examination revealed sophisticated keylogging software that had been recording every keystroke made on Hartwell's computers for over 2 years. The malware was hidden deep within the system and had been designed to transmit login credentials and authorization codes to external servers. Chen's analysis of the malware led to a shocking discovery. The software had been installed using administrative privileges that could only be accessed by someone with the highest level of system authorization within the royal household. This narrowed the list of suspects to fewer than a dozen individuals, all of whom held positions of extraordinary trust within the monarchy. The breakthrough came when Chen discovered that the malware had been installed during a specific maintenance window 6 months earlier. Cross-referencing this with security logs and staff schedules, they identified that only 3 people had access to Dr. Hartwell's office systems during that time period. One of those individuals was Thomas Ashford, the Deputy Director of Royal Communications, who had been with the royal household for 8 years. Ashford's background check had been impeccable when he joined the royal staff. He was a Cambridge graduate with experience in government communications and an apparently unblemished record of service. However, Mitchell's deeper investigation revealed troubling information that hadn't surfaced in the original vetting process. Ashford's financial situation was far more precarious than anyone realized. He had accumulated massive gambling debts over several years, owing money to loan sharks and organized crime figures across London. The pressure to repay these debts had apparently made him vulnerable to recruitment by the criminal network behind the charity fraud. Further investigation revealed that Ashford wasn't acting alone within the royal household. Security camera footage and computer access logs showed that he had been working with Margaret Stone, a senior administrative assistant in the Charity Affairs Office, who had been providing him with additional access to sensitive systems and documents. Stone's motivation appeared to be different from Ashford's. Rather than gambling debts, she had been ideologically recruited by individuals who convinced her that exposing alleged royal financial impropriety was a form of whistleblowing. She apparently believed she was helping to reveal legitimate corruption rather than participating in a criminal scheme. The network's sophistication became clear as Mitchell and his team traced the connections between Ashford, Stone, and the external criminal organization. The operation was being run by Viktor Petrov, a Russian-born financier with connections to organized crime groups across Eastern Europe. Petrov had specifically targeted the royal household because of its reputation for integrity and its connections to the international charitable sector. Petrov's network had been operating similar schemes across Europe, targeting high-profile individuals and institutions to provide cover for money laundering operations. The British royal family represented their most prestigious target, offering both maximum credibility for their fraudulent activities and potential for causing significant political damage if exposed. The investigation revealed that the network had been planning to eventually expose the charity fraud themselves, timing the revelation to cause maximum damage to the monarchy's reputation. They had been building evidence of royal financial impropriety, intending to release it through controlled leaks to sympathetic media outlets. The goal wasn't just financial gain, but political destabilization of one of Britain's most important institutions. Working with international law enforcement agencies, Mitchell's investigation led to coordinated raids across 4 countries. Petrov and 17 members of his network were arrested simultaneously in London, Moscow, Geneva, and Brussels. The operation recovered over $40 million in stolen funds and prevented the planned media campaign designed to damage the royal family's reputation. Ashford and Stone were arrested at their homes on the same morning, caught completely off guard by the speed and scope of the operation. The evidence against them was overwhelming, including computer records, financial transactions, and recorded conversations with their criminal contacts. The aftermath of the investigation was carefully managed to minimize damage to the royal family's reputation. Queen Camilla was personally briefed on the findings and took immediate steps to strengthen the security of royal charitable operations. New protocols were implemented to prevent similar infiltration attempts, and all staff with access to sensitive financial information underwent additional security screening. Dr. Hartwell worked closely with Mitchell to implement comprehensive reforms to the charitable donation process. Multi-factor authentication, regular security audits, and independent oversight were established to ensure that the royal family's charitable work could continue without fear of exploitation by criminal networks. The case never became public in its full scope. Official statements mentioned that security improvements had been made to royal financial systems following a routine review, but the details of the international criminal network and the extent of the infiltration remained classified. The public continued to see Queen Camilla's charitable work as a beacon of royal integrity, unaware of how close that reputation had come to being deliberately destroyed. For Mitchell, the investigation had been both the most challenging and most important work of his career. He had protected the royal family not just from physical threats, but from a sophisticated attempt to undermine the very foundations of their public service. The network he had uncovered and dismantled represented a new kind of threat to democratic institutions, one that exploited trust and reputation rather than relying on violence or traditional espionage. The experience had taught Mitchell that protecting the monarchy in the modern world required more than just physical security. The royal family's greatest strength, their reputation for integrity and charitable service, was also their greatest vulnerability. Criminal networks would continue to target institutions like the monarchy precisely because of their credibility and public trust. As Mitchell returned to his regular duties protecting the royal family, he carried with him the knowledge that threats could come from the most unexpected sources. The investigation that had started with a single suspicious donation had revealed an international criminal conspiracy that had nearly succeeded in weaponizing the royal family's own charitable work against them. His vigilance had prevented not just financial crime, but a deliberate attack on one of Britain's most cherished institutions. The network behind Queen Camilla's donation had been exposed and dismantled, but Mitchell knew that other threats would emerge. The modern world presented new challenges to ancient institutions, and protecting the monarchy would require constant adaptation and unwavering attention to detail. His investigation had proven that even the smallest irregularity could be the first sign of a threat that could shake the very foundations of the crown.